So for the last half of my guitar playing life, which is roughly, I think, about 16 years at this point, 16 years is my total guitar playing life. For at least 8 of those years, I have been, contrary to what many people on YouTube will recommend, I've actually been using thick guitar strings. Now, as someone who makes his living primarily when I'm performing as a jazz musician, it's quite common to use thicker strings, but lately, and I think it was Rick Beato who kind of kicked this off, and fair play to him, there's been this trend I find of people going for lighter and lighter and lighter guitar strings. And I recently actually experimented. Usually I play 12s or 13s. Right now I'm back on 12s. But thick guitar strings, by all means, 52 to 12, tuned in standard tuning. Those are pretty thick. And most people would be a little bit hesitant to maybe go that thick. Whereas the most common gauges still seem to be 9s and 10s. I recently experimented with going down in string gauge to 11s, and I found that I actually had a harder time playing them than thick strings. So in this video, I just wanted to kind of talk about some of the benefits that thick strings have over thin strings, and just kind of offer the counter side to this argument that Rick Beato and various other YouTubers have made. So the first kind of thing that I think in terms of thicker strings giving you a benefit for is something that I noticed actually right away when I switched down to 11s. And they only survived on my guitar for about a day and a half before I was like, nope, can't do it. And I went back and threw 12s on. But the thing that happens with thicker gauge strings that actually gives you a huge advantage in some ways is that because the string is thicker, it can't vibrate as freely because it's under more tension. So you'd have to put more energy into it to make it vibrate up and down as much. And what actually happens is you can run a very low action with thicker strings because it's not flopping around as much, bouncing off of the frets. And that was something that I immediately noticed, even when I went down to 11s, which is on the thicker side of what people would commonly use. And I found that I actually had to put a little bit more relief into my neck and furthermore raise the action. Now, there is the difference, and this is really probably mostly a preference thing, but I would argue it's worth trying some thicker strings. Like if you're using 9s, try a set of 11s, maybe try a set of 12s. I feel like it's the cheapest and easiest way to mess around with gear. But what I love on my guitars is I use really thick strings, and I don't know how visible this is on camera, but my action on either side is just under about 1.5 millimeters. So my pick is 1.5 mils, and it is being pinched by the low E string, and I can play relatively cleanly. Again, if I have a messed up fingering, I might get a little bit of buzz, but I have super low action because the strings are able to run closer to the fretboard. That was something that I really didn't like the feeling of raising my action, is that while the 11s are easier to press down because there's less tension, they have to be physically higher off of the neck, and it left my fingers kind of feeling springy. Like there was a lot of depression every time I had to depress the string further when I played. And that was a feeling that I learned I really, really didn't like. So that's kind of an example number one of why I favor thick strings over thin strings, because people always talk about thin strings being easier, but I actually felt like I was having to work a little bit harder with the thinner strings on. Now, the second kind of benefit that I get from this, that anybody who plays thicker guitar strings and then has gone to a music store and played, a Fender that's strung up with 9s from the factory maybe has experienced this. But if you're grabbing chords that are more complicated than your basic power chords and bar chords, say for example you play something like this, I find that it's a lot more comforting to have the extra tension on the strings, because I'm not pulling any strings sharp, I'm not pushing them flat or anything like that. Or sorry, I'd be pushing them sharp still. But the strings are stable and I can make bigger reaches without bending them sharp or flat, because there's just a little bit more, it's almost like you have more stable ground to stand on, if that makes any sense. And that's something that I really like, and when I'm playing a guitar that has lighter strings on them, I often feel a little bit like almost concerned because it doesn't feel right to me. So that's another huge benefit I find with thicker strings, is that once you get used to them, and you maybe have lowered your action a little bit because you can now, you have a stable platform for doing bigger reaches on that is really actually kind of beneficial, because you're not pulling things sharp and you're not doing that. The other advantage that you have is if you're bending with those, this is kind of tied the same way. If I wanted to bend this note to this note, when you're using thicker strings, you have, again, it's harder to bend them, but you get a much stronger kind of, I'm way less likely to overshoot a bend, which is another kind of benefit about using these thicker strings. Now, the third point I'd like to make about this is that you can get, I don't want to say that there's more tone or there's more sound out of thicker strings, but there's kind of two aspects to this point that I really like. The first is it just makes the whole guitar vibrate a little bit more, which I've found makes it feel a little bit more lively. If you think about it on a scientific level, it just makes sense. There's more tension on it, therefore it's going to vibrate the wood a little bit more. And I'm not trying to say that this is a huge noticeable benefit for sustain or anything like that. I just mean physically playing a guitar with at least 12s on it feels a lot more lively and exciting to me than playing with thinner strings. I find sometimes thinner strings, the guitars sound, or they don't sound, they feel a little bit dead to me. And then the other aspect of this is that, again, scientifically, if you use thicker strings, there's going to be a little bit stronger of a magnetic field for your pickups to react to, which if you're playing an electric instrument, is, as far as I'm concerned, irrefutable science, that more metal will create a stronger kind of field for you to go around. And what I tend to find with this is that there's a little bit more roundness on the bass end. It tends to sound a little bit less thin. And as someone who primarily likes thick, warm humbucker tones, that's super desirable to me, as I find that you just get a little bit more roundness to your sound. And again, you just get a nice kind of full sound where sometimes, especially on the higher strings actually, I notice that if I'm playing a guitar with thinner strings on it, I get a twang that is not necessarily an undesirable sound. It's just not the sound that I like to hear when I'm kind of playing, for myself. And then the final thing that I'd like to say about this that I don't think gets talked about enough is playing thicker strings can actually benefit your pick attack quite a bit. And I don't even necessarily mean like hearing the pick, like that quacky kind of thunk that you can get from your pick. I just simply mean that because the strings are under more tension, they will give way to your pick quicker than if you were using a thinner string. That was the other thing that I noticed when I switched to 11s, is that my right hand sometimes felt like there was, which is funny because the initial resistance is maybe a little bit harder on thicker strings, but your pick gets out of the way faster because the string will take less before it bounces over the tip of your pick. Whereas when I used the 11s, I could actually feel on my pick, it was like there was like a little bit of padding or something on it that made it feel slightly different to me. My pick wasn't going through the strings quite as quickly just because the strings had less tension on them, so they would give a little bit down before the pick made it through. Now, this is again all just my personal experiences, and it's something again that I see everybody online seems to be talking about these days, going lighter in string gauges. And I tried it and I didn't like it. So I just wanted to offer some kind of arguments as to why using thicker strings can actually be a benefit to certain players and certain things. I'm of course not saying that anybody who doesn't play thick strings is wrong. Everybody has different feelings about the guitar. Everybody likes different setups. So 100% do what's correct for you. But if you're feeling curious, I'd strongly encourage you to try using thicker strings and just see what it's like, see if it's for you. Because I have learned, as over my years of playing the guitar, again, I've learned that I like pretty much a straight neck with relatively low action and really thick strings on it, because the low action and the stiff platform lets me kind of move smoother and in a less kind of springy fashion. If you prefer lighter gauge strings, that's of course totally fine, but you never know until you try. And like I'm sure everybody watching this, I have been prone to suffer from GAS, gear acquisition syndrome. And messing around with strings is one of the cheapest ways that you can completely change the sound and feel of your guitar. So I'd strongly recommend you, if you haven't, to try thicker strings. And if you do, let me know what you think in the comments, because I personally am a huge fan, and anytime I try to go thinner, I come running back to my 12s or my 13s. So if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. It truly helps me out more than you could know. If you want to take a guitar lesson with me, there's a link to get in touch with me down in the description. I'd love to work with you on whatever's troubling you on the guitar. If you want to support me in the free educational content that I put out here on YouTube, as well as getting exclusive access to behind the scenes videos and also early access to every single upload to my channel, you can support me down on Patreon, link in the description there. It's a wonderful little community of guitar players, and I'd love to see you join us. If you want to get some more kind of laser-focused educational content from me, I do have a video course and an ebook for sale. You can check those out down in the description as well. And last but not least, I've got new videos coming out every single week, so I hope I'll see you in the next one. And until I do, I'll wish you a wonderful day, and I hope you have some fun playing the guitar. Thanks.